Welcome back to the MGL team tournament in Iron Order 1919. We have reached round 4 and the competition is starting to separate the contenders from the pretenders. 18 teams entered the tournament and only 9 remain. One team received a buy-in to the next stage, leaving 8 teams, 16 players to battle across a single map divided into 4 continents. North America, Africa, South America and Asia. 4 battlefields, 4 different strategies. 4 teams fighting to keep their championship hopes alive. North America was won through expansion, Africa through aggression, South America through combined land and air dominance, and Asia through superior coordination, composition and teamwork. Let's break down how each battle unfolded. Now I do apologize if I skim through everything much faster than usually, but I've recorded this 5 times as the video got corrupted, so instead of a half an hour I'm expecting to be a 20-minute video with much less information, but better that than nothing. Sadly, after 12 hours of recording, I cannot spend any more time than I would love to. Without further ado, Great Plains Confederacy in Florida, played by Joseph and Time Lord, versus Deutsche America in Texas, played by Erwin's partner. Deutsche America was unable to play and therefore barely expanded at all during the feast phase. Meanwhile, Joseph put together one of the largest expansions we've seen, conquering huge amounts of territory while preserving both units and health. Because of that, Joseph and Florida entered the war with nearly twice the army size they would normally have. Things got even worse for their opponents when a failed right-of-the-way attempt trapped roughly a third of Texas forces while also allowing Joseph's militia to remain inside his capital. The moment war began, several rounds of bomber strikes opened the way for a lightning-fast capital capture within minutes. At that point, the outcome was already decided. Texas had lost its capital, lost units and lost the initiative. Deutsche America became the final player standing, but with roughly 3 times fewer troops and little activity, there was no realistic path back into the game. His capital eventually fell without a fight. This wasn't a war, it was a demonstration of the gap between the S-tier team and a C-tier team. No amount of units and no strategy will prepare you if you don't have the activity to back it up. Next fight was the Battle of Africa, Ethiopia and Hausa Union, played by Dwight and Brindley, against Angola and Margrave, played by Wolf and Primo Orchid. Africa developed very differently from previous rounds. Although Primo Orchid has also similarly used heavy mechs, medium mechs, bit of artillery, bit of AMGs, Dwight has continuously used 18 artilleries, so placed his noble doctrine to use and created many artilleries. And Rendray adopted a bit of similar approach to Primo Orchid and also created AMGs, artilleries, but apart from instead of using medium mechs, he has used bombers. Wolf decided to go with a similar approach to what he has done previously with communistic nations, so a bit of medium mechs, a bit of motorized infantry, a bit of bombers, anti-air units and such, so that he can expand aggressively from all sides. Wolf's opening strategy resolved around using territory gained during peace to move his army as close as possible to the Hausa capital as possible. Once war began, he pushed directly toward it while simultaneously launching attacks across multiple parts of Hausa territory. We could note a first blunder of Hausa Union. He has left all the seashore totally empty. No scouts, no militias. If you would put militias level 4, you can protect the cities, protect the seashores. Even in the cities, the militia level 4 are undetectable, which means people can start to embark, but they don't really see it because they need a scout level 4 to detect it. If they do it from a seashore, from a sea provinces, they will not even be able to see it. Now, Wolf has done a very intelligent play, where he has placed units inside of these provinces and then disgathered militias all around, so that Hausa was thinking that he's keeping him at bay. Not the problem, one scout would easily give you an information how many units there were. There were, I think, 4 units, so there is a mistake here. The militia is very good to avoid, let's say, to avoid gaps between the defenses, and is not good for offensive purposes. So both sides actually were stuck, but it was the Angola which was with a much more advantage, because they were able to create much more opening fields. So when the time of war happened, not many things were seen by Hausa Union, and of course motorized units were spreading all across the back of the main stacks and main territory. Now of course these territories are the difficult terrain, which Hausa Union was looking forward to defend on and to get or to make use of the bonuses that their doctrine has. However, Angola has done a smart move by expanding into the north and granting actually the access and fast access into the easy terrain, and thus nullifying all the bonuses that the noble has. The objective was simple: damage the economy, force Hausa onto the defensive, and keep expanding while they reacted. Surprisingly, Hausa managed to catch up to Wolf's army before it reached the capital. Rather than avoid the engagement, Wolf deliberately accepted the unfavorable fight in order to pin Hausa forces in place. Now, the reason of the unfavorable fight is because on the numerical basis, of course, Hausa had much more units fighting on that field. However, in reality, it was a favorable ground because Angola was able to fight on easy terrain with medium mechs. So normally in that situation, noble defending on a difficult terrain with core bonus, there would be no chances for such a melee unit onslaught to be successful, especially with scouts across the seashores, militias better, so everything would be stopped at bay. However, due to heavy blunders, not only one but maybe 3-4 blunders, another blunder, for example, Ethiopia was shooting or launching attacks from uncovered province. Usually, if you want to keep your bombers secure, you launch attacks from airbase level 2, not level 1, and you launch the airbase in difficult terrain so that your anti-air units are much more powerful, as they get additional bonuses on defense, and thus when the enemy bombers are coming in to attack you whilst you are refueling, because when the bombers are refueling they turn into cargo is a light unit, 30 HP, so a bomber, instead of stack of 6 bombers, instead of 500 HP, they have 180, and they are a light unit. Same for interceptors, so they can be easily picked off if you decide to attack, and then basically you have to refuel. So you wait for them to reach the territory back, and then basically you can kill those units just as cargo. So they made another blunder, bring in the Ethiopia bombers, which later on caused them much more problems, as they weren't able to pick off the motorized infantry attacks. These bombers would have been even a better use if they would be here from the start with the scouts and perhaps clearing the embarking units, and thus eliminating the threat from the behind, thus allowing Hausa Union much more time to get rid of the units. After everything was done, Hausa still had pretty formidable amount of artilleries, and medium mechs were almost killed. If that would be in a difficult terrain, they would be definitely killed. However, it was a good vision that was planted at the beginning, and it is the team with the better vision and fulfillment of that vision that will get the victory. While the battle raged, mobile infantry bypassed the engagement, slipped around the front, captured the capital, and continued taking territory behind the lines. On the eastern front, Primo faced Ethiopia. Early scouting from Ethiopia was limited, making it difficult to fully understand the plan before peace ended. However, once the situation became clearer and the Ethiopian bombers got grounded, Primo recognized that he held advantage in both military strength and terrain. Ethiopia struggled to launch meaningful offensive and slowly became trapped within its own territory. Several poor positional positions allowed Primo to seize critical ground, opening large sections of Ethiopia to mobile infantry raids. Normally, Ethiopia's bombers could have slowed those advances, like I said, but Wolf's bombers successfully grounded them and neutralized them, allowing the mobile infantry to operate freely. After analyzing Ethiopia's army composition, Primo knew he held advantage. Rather than force risky engagements, he played patiently, steadily taking territory and applying pressure. Step by step, Ethiopia was pushed back towards its capital. Eventually, Ethiopia moved out for a decisive battle on the outskirts of the capital. During that engagement, Primo captured the capital itself and secured the victory. Overall, Wolf and Primo once again demonstrated the effectiveness of their formula: rapid territorial gains, activity, pressure on multiple fronts, and forcing opponents to constantly react. That is the problem with micromanagement. Both Rindley and White have both utilized the favorable meta techniques of using artilleries, AMGs, and micromanagement. Sadly, if you go for this type of fighting, where micromanagement is required, but you don't micromanage, then you are out to have even a bigger failure than you would have if you wouldn't use it at all. So if you use artilleries, the biggest problem is territory, which is vast and wide. So you have to make it as concise as possible. That's first and foremost. Secondly, you have to be very active and almost always be on to ensure that you don't get outflanked. And thirdly, you need to be aware of what your units, what your enemies are doing. In this case, Wolf expected a chaotic artillery heavy war requiring significant micromanagement. Instead, the sheer number of simultaneous invasions overwhelmed their opponents as they were not able to react before those artillery-based armies could be used effectively. The result was another convincing victory, and, sadly, elimination of Zero and Renly players from the tournament. Now, Battle of South America between Lord Sent and Foxy, played by Chis Alpina and Brazilian Empire, versus Bolivia and Guyana, played by Dabar and Dropkick, was supposed to be one of the premier matchup of the round and a clash worthy of the tier list rankings. Instead, activity issues heavily affected Dabar and Dropkick, which were unable to expand as usual, and also with the way that they expanded brought many questions. Dropkick's army became trapped through a right-of-way maneuver when his activity repeatedly caused costly mistakes. Bombers were left hovering over enemy interceptors and anti-air positions, while artillery units were frequently left without protection. As a result, not only was his expansion significantly weaker than what it was previously seen by Thor whilst playing Bolivia, but his armies have suffered far greater damage throughout conquest. What's worse, by the time the war started, many of his forces were still far from the front line. Foxy immediately recognized the opportunity and seized the moment. Now Foxy decided to go for a very risky situation, which is total investment of bombers. He created 16 bombers from 2 air bases level 2, only 1 stack of artilleries and anti-air units to keep the airfield protected. Now normally this is very risky because first and foremost it can be predictable, and secondly it means that you have lack of ground units or not enough of ground units to stop an onslaught or potential melee fighting. So for example, if the Bolivia would have noticed it sooner and Guyana would shift, for example, 12 mechs down the south so that he makes a push, first and foremost bombers are not as efficient against mechanized units. If he doesn't have any AMGs, this push could be unstoppable, and thus a simple switch of units could be provided where only mechs would be sent down, but of course the artilleries and other units from Bolivia would be sent up north. By the time Brazil pushes up in the north, the south would have been lost and perhaps further battle could take place. Bombers require space, but in this situation, as most of the armies were almost dead by dropkick, this didn't bear any meaning. In addition, many people don't watch the newspaper, which could be quickly accessed if you type the name of the nation in the newspaper search bar, and you can easily see that, for example, at various moments, even early in the game, a 3rd Bomber Brigade killed a unit, a 20th Bomber Brigade killed a unit, a 7th Bomber Brigade a unit. So you could put pieces together. If an enemy has 2 air bases of level 2, which he had at the seashore, so it's easily identifiable, and then in the newspaper the bomber have killed or more than one, you can at least assume, perhaps maybe you might not know that there's 18 or 15 or whatever, but at least you can have a little bit of hint that the person is preparing more than 1 stack of bombers, so about 10 bombers, maybe 12, in this case maybe more, but this is definitely something that people would or should utilize. The same goes with all of the units. If the enemies, for example, see the medium mech has conquered some kind of captured some kind of city, but of course if the enemy is creating, for example, 2 or 3 medium mechs, then and they are putting it in a separate stacks, then of course it will be the different number, and thus most of the players would then be seeing that the person has more mechs, so he has to invest in either hunter mechs or AMGs. So in the end, in an elite level sparring, there should be no surprise when it comes to the usage of units. And what happened in the north by Daba, what basically is that his armies were mostly moving to the front line. Even at the start of the war phase, his units were far away from the front line, and thus by the time they arrived, he has actually already lost 2 sieges. Lord Sent have successfully moved into the territory, took the city, basically forced him to have a decision: either he will make a shot and then he will lose the siege mechs, or he will have to retreat. He decided to make a shot, and then he was changing to a marching stance, and thus Lord Sent has force marched it, take the province. Right now then was the enemy, well, it was the Dabar that was on enemy territory, which means he was minus 75% when it comes to movement. The artilleries could be brought much closer and much faster to the war, and thus they were able to fire onto the siege mechs and kill them almost instantly. Without sieges, he wasn't able to put him far behind so that he could shoot at the artilleries and AMGs. He also didn't split the units because he went to sleep. It wasn't active when it comes to actually. So like I said, if you're using artilleries, which is based on micromanagement, you have to micromanage. If you don't micromanage and you just leave them behind in one stack, then you are doomed to fail. At this moment, we were able to observe for a couple of hours that Brazil was shooting with the fire of 4 different stacks, whereas Guyana was shooting back with the force of 1 stack. So of course he was doomed to fail. With limited options remaining, Dabar tried to hold a choke point, and then went offline, allowing Lord Sent to continue winning favorable exchanges and further increase the advantage. From that point onwards, the battle was largely one-sided. Foxy and Lord Sent combined excellent communication with a high-risk, high-reward strategy. Their commitment to supporting one another and exploiting enemy weaknesses allowed them to dominate the continent from the middle stage of expansion all the way to the final outcome. Now another fight, Battle of Asia. Turkestan and Exiled Raj, played by Boatmech and Marshall, versus Shibei and Guangxi Click, played by Thor and Balkan. This was the headline matchup of the round. 2 undefeated teams entered Asia. Neither team had lost the capital in previous rounds, and many expected this to be the closest battle of the tournament so far. Balkan and Thor opened with their new, now familiar, strategy: block expansion routes, rapidly close the distance between teammates, and then spread outward from a secured position. In this way, they spread into Tibet and they spread into India, so that Exile Raj couldn't expand as he used to. He instead changed to take over Gujarat Sabha and then move into Afghanistan. Sadly, due to miscommunication between Boatmech and Marshall, Boatmech also prepared armies in Afghanistan. Once he realized that Marshall changed the plans and wanted to take Afghanistan, he has moved to Caucasia, but this has left him with 6 hours or even 8 hours of movement wasted. Here we can see what he had in day 3, and here we can see what we had in day 4. 400 HP lost, 200 HP lost in the past 24 hours just against Caucasia, just because he had to be much faster than previously. If there would be a better communication, the situation would have been a lot better. First and foremost, Afghanistan would have been gone way quicker. They would lose much less HP, and at the start of the battle, both of their armies would be actually at the front line rather than much more behind it. Now Exile Raj has decided to go for siege mechs and artilleries, so a similar build-up as they had in previous rounds. On paper, Exile Raj army looked comparable to Balkans. In practice, several units were scattered across the map, and activity issues at critical moments prevented effective use of motorized infantry. One of the biggest mistakes was the decision to omit scouts. Without vision, uncertainty dominated decision-making. Even when provinces belonging to Shibei and Guangxi were left exposed, Boatmech and Marshall were unable to capitalize. The turning point came when Shibei split his forces and began pushing through Tibet, attempting to isolate the 2 opponents from one another. Now before that, interestingly, Thor's units were expanding much better than Exile Raj or Turkestan or Guangxi Click. But at the same time, he didn't have as many losses. He captured provinces a couple of times when he was capturing those from the AI, and then was letting the AI capture it back so that he can have additional resources. In the end, he didn't lose HP, but was managed to have more units than actually Turkestan or Exile Raj, despite it is them that were communistic, not him. Also, this meant that by the time the war started, his units were not at the front line, but because Exile Raj and Turkestan didn't communicate as good and weren't prepared as well, they weren't able to exploit this mistake. as his units were going towards Tibet, Turkestan was going to sleep. They used determination and activity to basically use it to their advantage, was pushing his scouts to ensure that he sees that where his main stack, their main army is, so that he can easily push down south and help to encircle Exile Raj. As the encirclement developed, Exile Raj chose to leave siege mechs behind in the capital and launch an attack toward Balkan. The problem was coordination. The attack was poorly synchronized and the advancing stacks were destroyed, even the stacks which had artilleries inside of them. While Exile Raj armies eliminated and only Turkestan's northern fortresses remaining intact, Bothmec launched a final desperate counterattack, but it came too late. His armies were intercepted, trapped, and eventually destroyed. Despite taking some losses, Shibe successfully completed the encirclement and eliminated the remaining resistance. Bothmec and Marshall resigned shortly afterward. Looking back, the overall strategy resembled their earlier Asia round. They skipped mechanized production in favor of heavy artillery investment, hoping to leverage superior damage output against lighter units. So communists have plus 30% against light units, which means on a plain terrain or on an easy terrain, they have actually better attack than noble. However, they didn't use it in their fighting, as most of the fighting happened in a difficult terrain. Moreover, Thor and Balkan didn't buy into the artillery scrutiny and basically decided to continue with the artilleries and not make too much AMGs, and thus the mixture of artilleries and siege mechs didn't come to use against nobles. Had Exile Raj expanded more efficiently and arrived earlier, mechanized units may have entered the battlefield sooner. That could have created a far more aggressive push-oriented strategy capable of pressuring Balkan's artillery and bombers. And especially that both teams actually were able to detect all armies from one another as they placed spies inside of them. They even grounded the bombers of Balkan. However, they weren't able to exploit it because, like I said, teamwork just wasn't there. The bombers wasn't even ready to exploit the grounding of their bombers. By the start of the war, Balkan and Thor had roughly only 10 more units than their opponents, despite facing the communist economies. The advantage continued to grow throughout the conflict and ultimately secured the victory. Balkan and Thor remain unbeaten, and with their win, only 6 teams remain out of the original 18 teams that entered the tournament. Now let's go through the tier list. Lieutenant Yoda and Arrow sadly cannot be any more than E. They lost in the most fastest way and rookie way possible. Not good in expansion, not good in choice of units, not seeing the threats of losing the capital and so on. So basically, sadly, not an F because they didn't surrender, but they did take part. However, an E. The biggest, let's say, letdown was by Deba and Dropkick. They didn't play on their level, weren't active enough as they usually are, weren't motivated or dedicated enough, couldn't perhaps because of the private reasons. However, if we just base without leaving emotions, let's say, outside, but just leaving and securing the performance, seeing as there wasn't enough of intel gathering on both of the units, no spies, not looking in a newspaper to see, they weren't prepared for the attacks. Neither of the sides were performing good. The Bar had, of course, better performance with his expansion and capturing some cities. However, overall, he didn't, or he wasn't able to, let's say, outsmart in a fighting phase an army which was similar when it comes to strength. Perhaps Noble has an advantage on the difficult terrain. However, there could have been a hugely different outcome if he would have played to his skill set. Zero and Relay, I think, played on their level. They got dropped from the B tier into the C tier because, like I said, they lacked vision from the beginning. There were two nations split with one another instead of trying to link up with one another and actually perhaps have better results. Zero should have definitely invest in AMGs, at least one stack, And even if he wouldn't invest in AMGs and have the same type of, let's say, setup, he should have better use of the scout, patrol. The seashore definitely would be able to afford militias level 4. It's a very cheap unit to do that. And he failed to, of course, have a vision from the beginning when it comes to expansion in the north, to not allow Angola to have some short, because the thing that is for micromanagement is the buffer zone. If you don't have a buffer zone, if you don't have a large area to retreat to, then of course you are doomed. And with medium mechs, with a melee fighting, if you are right at the nose, then of course that advantage is taken away. Now Foxy and Lotzet, I think, have also not played very well in this round, in my opinion. They made a lot of blunders, and I was thinking for a second if to not split them or put them to the sea, but I'm of course joking and moving them to S tier finally, but I'll get to them later on. First and foremost, Wolf and Primo. I think they deserve an upscale when it comes to their execution. They are much more sure of themselves and perhaps better at investigating what units the enemies have, or potential what they have, and how can they use their units. They are slowly learning the importance or the information about the game. Boatmech and Marshall has beat them in the round 2. I wonder what the outcome would be right now, which is what we will find in the next round, so I'm looking forward to that. Of course, Boatmech and Marshall have been downgraded from the S tier. They have made, even though they have made a very good, let's say, non-aggression, or in a peace period, they didn't have as much losses, almost none. Good expansion, however, still, when it comes to that fighting period, they didn't have as much team connection when it comes to. It's very important that when you're fighting with somebody, even if both of the players can be S tier individually, if they don't communicate, if they lose even 5 minutes or 10 minutes of indecisiveness, it can be crucial to the end outcome. And I feel like that's what happened with a couple of AI captures, a couple of expansion, as well as unit making, as well as the intel gathering and all that. So I think they played well. They were of course against one of the best, if not, well, currently the best players in team, proving everybody that they are still unbeaten. However, they could have performed way better, and if they would capitalize on every blunder that Balkan and Thor has done, like for example, Balkan has lost a core city to AI, has also lost a lot of militias, and thus this wasn't capitalized upon. So it should have been exploited in a much better way. Time Lord and Joseph simply played on their level, dominated the fight, but there isn't so much to say, so they are remaining at the S tier. And of course, Foxy and Lotzent, definitely with the relentless, with the motivation, with the dedication to be, well, stay awake all the time, being active all the time, use the team communication, talk with one another, when to attack, how to attack, what to use, make most use of the resources, and have fun whilst doing it. Definitely deserve to be an S tier. As they have lost against Balkan and Thor, they of course cannot be, well, both teams have actually lost, so it will be a very interesting matchup to see what will be the outcome of this. Kirito and Mr. Pavok of course didn't fight in this tournament, or in this round, so let's see what their fight will be in the next round, as they will fight Balkan and Thor, which will be a very interesting matchups. I'm looking forward to round 5, so wish you all good luck, have fun, and see you next video.